And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 93rd episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, June 18, 2019, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. You can catch our live broadcast Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. on our YouTube page or our website. If you missed the live broadcast, you can subscribe to our show for free on whatever platform you listen to podcasts so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at The Hoosier Sound and at Indiana HQ. Subscribe and turn the bell on. All of our information is at our website, indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. On the docket tonight, we are very, very, very excited to have this special guest on our show. Bill Murphy, Indiana basketball historian and writer of 3 books, joins Nathan and myself to discuss Branch Mccracken. Bill wrote the book titled Branch, the Branch Mccracken Story, and he is here with us tonight to give us lots of fun stories, life lessons, and great insights on an all-time IU great. Bill, how are you doing this evening?
I'm very happy to be with both of you guys today and join Hoosier Sound, the Hoosier Nation.
Awesome. Our first question to kick things off tonight is basically what inspired you to write the book Branch, the Branch Mccracken Story?
Well, I'm a historian. I taught history all my life as a teacher, and I like to bring history alive to my students and to everyone else. And one particular time I was walking to the stadium, and a young college kid came up, and he's like, "Oh, isn't Eric Gordon the best player that's ever played here at IU?" And I'm like, "Well, he's really good, but he's not the best ever to play at IU." I got thinking, young kids don't have a sense of history or who's come before. And it's really hard to say who is the greatest of all time because there's so many different variables that go into that. And then as I'm walking out, so this is going through my mind, as I'm walking out of another game, someone's like, "Why is it called McCracken Court?" I'm like, okay, I have got to put down in words for people so they understand why on December 18th, 1971, we honored the sheriff, Branch Mccracken, with McCracken Court. Now, of course, he had passed away because he passed away on June 4th, 1970, just 5 days before he would have turned 62. So he was a relatively young man when he died. But I just wanted to bring to life the legend of Branch Mccracken, and so the younger generations would know exactly who this man really was, because he was a fantastic player, a fantastic coach, and equally a fantastic person. He really was. In fact, now, I just want to. I'll start off when we want to know who Branch really was. This is in my book. It's my favorite quote of Branch. He put it in his book that he wrote back in 1955 about Indiana basketball, and it was kind of an instructional book on basketball. And in it, he put, "A coach is not paid in money or winning teams, but in the men his players become." So that gives you a sense of who Branch Mccracken really was.
I love that quote, Bill. Now, you mentioned that Branch Mccracken was a player and a coach at IU. Could you shed some light on how he was as a player?
Yeah, I'm going to go back when he was actually in high school in Monrovia. His sophomore, junior, and senior year in Monrovia, his teams won 78 out of 84 games, so they were 78-6. And they used to have something in Cincinnati called the Tri-State Tourney, and schools from Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky would all come in there. Well, Monrovia went all 3 years that Branch was a sophomore, junior, and senior, and the junior and senior year, Monrovia, this little school, Monrovia, Indiana, won the Tri-State Tourney, and Branch was selected as the most valuable player both of those years. In fact, their team actually even garnered a nickname and they were called the Cornstalk Boys, and they were fantastic. So then Branch comes to IU, and Monrovia is very close to Bloomington, so there was a natural tendency there. Everett Dean was a great basketball coach for IU at the time, and he had recruited Branch. And like he said, there were a lot of schools that wanted him, but he didn't have too much trouble. Now, interesting story on this is that Pat Page, who was a football coach at Butler, had seen Branch play as a junior, and he was trying to recruit Branch to go to Butler. But, Branch was this big man. In fact, one of his nicknames was the Bear. And so here's this 6'4" huge guy back in the 1920s. And Pat Page wanted him to come to Butler and play football, even though he had never played football in his life. Well, turns out that he does go to IU. Everett Dean is successful in recruiting him to IU. And it turns out that his sophomore year at IU, when he's eligible to play, he plays football first for Pat Page, who had left Butler and come to IU to be the football coach. And Branch actually did the same thing that Everett Dean did. Now, here you've got two guys that are All-American basketball players, and they both scored touchdowns in football before they scored a basket in basketball the very first time. Of course, obviously, football season hits before basketball season, but it's kind of an oddity that both of these great coaches and players did that. In fact, Branch scored one touchdown in what is called the greatest homecoming game in IU history. They're playing the great and powerful Minnesota team, and Branch picks up a fumble and rushes into the end zone and scores. And he would tell his son later, he said, "I've never run so fast in my life." Because Bronco Nagurski was chasing him, the great, powerful Bronco Nagurski of Minnesota. So then he comes to IU. He's playing basketball. He actually is now. I'm going to go back a second. In football, he was honorable mention in 1928, his junior year, and he was all conference his senior year. He would also be All-American in basketball his senior year at IU. He would do something that's happened 42 times in history of IU, and in 1928, Branch, his sophomore year, would lead IU past the University of Chicago 32-13. Branch would score 24 points. 42 times in IU's history, a player has outscored the opponents all by himself. In fact, the very last time, and this is kind of fitting, the very last time happened on the time when IU was dedicating the McCracken Court on December 18th, 1970, and 71, and that was by John Ritter, who outscored Notre Dame 31-29.
Oh.
So that's the last time this happened. But Branch would do that. His 24 points against Chicago would be the all-time high point total for any player in the Big Ten for the next 10 years. That would hold up for 10 years. He would graduate his senior year at IU with 366 total points, which was also the Big Ten record at the time. And he set the single season record in the Big Ten with 147 points that particular year, beating the record that Stretch Murphy had at Purdue. So here he was an All-American his senior year. He led IU in 1928 to their Big Ten championship. It was the second of three Big Ten championships that Everett Dean would have as coach at IU. So he was a marvelous player, but he was just a gifted athlete. In fact, when he graduated from IU, the Green Bay Packers offered him $125 a game to play for the Green Bay Packers, but he turned it down because he wanted to coach basketball and he wanted to play professional basketball, which he did both at the same time. When he graduated from IU, he actually signed to coach at Ball State and he ended up coaching Ball State for 8 years. he was this small college, because at that time there was a big distinction between major college and small colleges, and Ball State was considered a small college at that time. And he, in 31 and 38, he would be named the small college coach of the year. And he did something that was tremendous for a coach. He had tremendous job security. He married Ball State's president's daughter. So he had tremendous job security from that point. But Mary Jo, his wife, would say later that when she went in and her dad was talking to her because she was going to marry Branch, he said he seemed to be more concerned about Branch's career as a coach than his daughter being happy in marriage. So, and then, of course, whenever Dean left to go to Stanford, Branch would then be the only choice for IU, and he would come in the 38-39 season to coach at IU. But he was a fantastic player, and one of the things that he did was he revolutionized basketball from the standpoint. He was one of the very few players to have a one-handed jump shot at that particular time. Most players shot with two hands. He would shoot with one hand. And the reason he did that, he said it was just quicker to get the ball off. And he was always concerned about trying to get the ball quick and away. So, and I mentioned about him being really big. He had several nicknames, and the Big Bear was one of them because of his size. The Sheriff, when he was coaching at IU, he was known as the Sheriff. And then he was also known, when he came to IU as a player, they called him Doc because he had at one point in time wanted to be a veterinarian when he was a small boy living in the country in Monrovia. And then there's one other nickname that nobody is familiar with that he had, and one of his nephews could never remember what Branch's name was, but he knew it was part of a tree. So he always called him Twig. So that was, I know, I love that particular story. I thought that was a lot of fun and everything, but he was a fantastic player. He really was.
I especially liked how you talked about when he was offered to be to play for $125 per game with the Green Bay Packers, and then just speaking of nowadays when the people are getting how many thousands and thousands of dollars per game, and it was.
Well, as we go on, and I've got some more stories, we'll find out how money has vastly increased over the years. But yeah, I love that he was offered $125 a game to play professional football.
That's funny. I know that you said you have been able to talk to him personally, right? When he was still alive? Right. Okay, so gotcha. So when you were talking to Branch, what kind of person was he?
He was wonderful. He really was. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of my stories come from I spent weeks talking to his son Dave after Branch had passed. And even though I'm an old man and watched Branch coach for many years, I really didn't have the opportunity to speak to him a lot. But I'll just give you one story about when I did get to speak to him that was really meaningful to me. I was a student in New Albany High School, New Albany Junior High at the time. And when Branch retired from coaching because of health, he still stayed at IU and worked with student teachers. So he would go around the state, and Branch had this vast array of connections around the state, as you can imagine. And he would go and observe his different student teachers. And he came to our junior high, and I'm watching this huge silver-haired man walk up the steps, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Branch Mccracken. Of course, I told our student teacher, I said, that's Branch Mccracken. And he's like, yes, that's the sheriff. And he's going on, and I'm like, look, dude, I didn't say this because my parents would kill me had I said anything like this. But I thought, look, dude, I know who the guy is. I've watched him coach all my life. I love this guy. So I walk up the steps because I'm going to talk to him. So I woke up the steps, and I'm a junior high kid. I had to put my one hand behind my back because it was shaking so much because I was so excited. But I walked up to him and I said, Coach McCracken, I just want to thank you for all the years and everything you did for our program and how great a coach you were. And I just cannot thank you enough. And I stuck out my other hand and shook his huge hands. I wasn't a big kid at the time. And these huge hands, and this guy was, and he was so kind, and he took time to talk to me, and he thanked me for this and everything. And then he happened to be with a friend of my great uncle's in Bloomington. And so my great uncle asked him a few weeks later, he said, hey, did you ever come across some kid in New Albany? And he goes, oh, yeah, Bill Murphy, yes. I remember him. He goes, oh, I'm surprised you remember his name. He goes, listen, when you're coaching, everybody wants to be part of you and everything. But he goes, for me to be retired and have some young kid come up and talk to me like that means a lot. So that's the kind of person he was. He really cared about his kids. I could go on with stories like Dr. Christie talked about how Branch would make sure that he got the classes he needed and talked to the medical board about accepting him to go into medicine and everything. And Max Walker, who was actually the most valuable player for IU in 1966 after the 7 seniors had graduated. But Max was a really good ball player for us. A lot of people don't realize how good he was, but he was a really good ball player. Well, Max was married when he was at IU, and he and his wife had a child, and the child died of crib death. Well, as you can imagine, Max lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He didn't have any money at all. And Branch and Mary Jo came up to him and said, look, don't worry, we're going to pay for all the funeral expenses. We'll make sure you guys get back. We'll get everything taken care of. And, Max, when I talked to Max, when I was doing the book, he said, you have no idea how unbelievably wonderful that was. And Jimmy Rail, who just passed away, the last year, Jimmy, who was an unbelievably fantastic player at IU, Jimmy talked about how after he graduated and everything, he had sent an invitation to Branch and Mary Jo to come to their wedding. And he said, I didn't know if he'd be able to be there or not. He goes, I walked down the aisle, and he goes, the first thing I see is there's Branch and Mary Jo sitting in the front row, and Branch is just beaming away. He's just so excited that everything's working out for me. So those are just a couple of stories about who Branch was as a person. And he just really cared about his kids. Ray Pavey, who was a great basketball player coming out of Newcastle. He and Jimmy Rail had the famous game between Newcastle and Kokomo where they're both fighting for who's going to win, be the leading scorer in the state of Indiana their senior year. And Ray Pavey comes to IU with Bolliard and with Rail, and they're all going to be great players. And Ray is in that automobile accident and is paralyzed. Well, Branch and Herman Wells, the president of IU, both arranged so that Ray, all his classes are on the first floor, with the exception of one science class that had a lab, but so that Ray could get into the classes very easy and everything. Ray Pavey told me, he said, I was the special ed student at IU at the time. So, again, those are just some examples of how caring Branch was as a person as well as a coach.
And I know you and I got to talk a little briefly last week, and I talked to you about this, but a lot of our longtime listeners know that that I'm a teacher, and I had to obviously go through student teaching and everything, and just having someone that's able to care about you and come and see you all the time really means a lot to us, because it's something that's completely different than what we've been doing. Some of us are a little farther away from campus than we have been the past 3.5 years, and it's just nice to have someone that that cares about us.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was, one of the things that Branch did was Branch would give each teacher 3x5 cards, and he would let every teacher know which ball players had their classes, and if they ever had a problem, they were to write that down on the card and give it to Branch, and he was going to make sure that the kids were in class, that they were doing what they were supposed to, and if they were having problems, Mary Jo was one of the top tutors at IU. Branch was always bringing the players home for Mary Jo to tutor to help them out in a class they were having trouble with. And then Tom Byer told me, and I love this, that Branch would go, there were like 6 or 7 coffee shops around the square in Bloomington. And he would go to every one of them every day and just talk to all the people. And Bolyard said he had a network of people. He goes, you as a player could never be anywhere you weren't supposed to be without somebody calling Branch and saying, hey, are they supposed to be here? And if you weren't supposed to be there, Branch was there right away letting you know you weren't supposed to be there. So he had a social network before there was a social network.
That's funny. So for at least the general population nowadays, I think most people when they hear the name Branch McCracken, they know him as the coach instead of the player and the kind of person that you just described him. So moving on to his coaching aspect of his entire life, his career, what made him such a good coach? What made him so successful?
Well, one of the things was that he brought a new system. Branch thought basketball should be fun and entertaining. And a name that's almost gone by the wayside now, you'll still hear people call it, but we used to be known as the Hurryin' Hoosiers. And we were called the Hurryin' Hoosiers because Branch's idea was you were up and down the court, you were going to fast break, and you were going to get as many opportunities to shoot the ball as you possibly could. And if you shot 70 times and it went in 35 times, then you were probably going to win that game because you were going to outscore your opponent. And that's just the way Branch did things. And here's the story of how great he was. Let's just take our second year under Branch McCracken, 1940. We would end up 20-3. We would win the national championship. Now, it's always kind of it was the second NCAA championship ever. But it was the first NCAA championship that the NCAA had actually sanctioned, because the first one was actually sanctioned by the coaches. But this was the first that, as an organization, the NCAA had sanctioned. So there's only 8 teams that are involved in this. We actually had finished second in the Big Ten that year. Purdue had won the Big Ten, but we had defeated Purdue twice. They had one less loss than we did in the Big Ten, but we had beaten Purdue both times at West Lafayette and at Bloomington. And so there's 2 stories, and I've talked to multiple people about it, but there's 2 stories. One story is at Purdue, the Purdue administration said, look, they beat us twice. They really deserve to go. And the other story is that Tony Hinkle was one of the people on the committee, and that the committee didn't even offer it to Purdue. They offered it to IU right off the bat. But at any rate, we go. There's 8 teams. We're in the East region. There's a West region and the East region. The first team that we are playing in the East region is going to be Springfield, Massachusetts. And we beat them. And so then we play Duquesne, and we beat Duquesne. And so we go out to Kansas City. Now, Kansas is representing the West. And so here we are in Kansas City, and it's really some fun stories in that whole thing. As they're taking the train and going out there, Branch and Mary Jo are looking at the menus on the train, and they're in French. So Branch looks to Mary Jo and he says, look, you take one table and translate for the boys, and I'll take the other table and translate for the boys. And Mary Jo looked at Branch and she said, since when do you know French? Which is, that's just a great story. So they go out there. Well, Branch doesn't want the boys. He wants the boys to just keep moving. That's his idea. We got to keep moving and moving. Well, the boys, Branch has meetings that the coaches have to go to. So the boys convinced Mary Jo to let them go to see this brand new movie out, Gone with the Wind. Now, for those who are really young, Gone with the Wind is an epically long movie. And so Mary Jo knows Branch is not going to be happy about this. During the intermission of the movie, she makes the boys to get up and run around the block a couple of times and then come back in to watch the second half of the movie. When Branch finds out, he makes them run a little bit more, but we end up killing Kansas. And it was funny because before the game started, they started giving all these gifts to the Kansas players because here we're in Kansas City and everything. And a guy that played for IU named Curly Armstrong, he gets really upset about this. He goes, well, isn't this something else? Here they are in front of all their fans, and they're giving them all these gifts and everything. Let's just go out and whip them in front of their fans, which is what they ended up doing. And at the end of the game, a guy named Naismith comes to Branch, and he says, I want to congratulate you on such a great team. And Branch looks at me and he said, my name is Naismith. And Branch goes, are you any relation to the guy that invented the game? He goes, yeah, I'm his son. And I can tell you right now, this is the greatest team I've ever seen play anywhere, ever. So Branch's style, the fast break style, Branch had the boys so fired up all the time. He had them in tip-top condition. And even like his last year in 1965, he went with a 2-1-2 press, or excuse me, a 2-2-1 press that was highly successful and made that last team of his a very successful team as well. But those are some of the things. His innovative style, his fast-paced game, he always said, and you went into a little bit into Archie, he always said, I can win a national championship with Indiana kids. And so he recruited mostly Indiana kids. I mean, he would have a few kids here or there. Obviously, the great Walt Bellamy came from North Carolina. He had Max Walker from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He had Archie Dees from Mount Carmel, Illinois. So there were some along the way, but many, many, many of his players were all Indiana kids.
Now, Bill, it seems like nowadays everyone has an opinion about Archie Miller, the current men's basketball coach. What would Branch think of Archie Miller's style, his demeanor, things like that?
Branch would tell everybody just to back off and give him some time. That's exactly what Branch would say. Well, I'll tell you this. Branch one time, Branch was, you're usually a legend in your own time. And Branch had his distractors along the way, too. I mean, he won 2 national championships. He won 4 Big Ten titles. Very similar tonight. In the 24 years Branch coached, he had 12 first or second place teams in the Big Ten, just like Knight in his 29 years of coaching had 16 first or second place teams in the Big Ten, finishing first or second in the Big Ten. So Branch would say sometimes, if you could coach orphans, you'd be in good shape. You didn't have to worry about any parents. He said you either coach an orphanage or coach a prison, because you would have you wouldn't have to deal with parents or you wouldn't have to deal with alumni. So Branch would tell people, and this is just my personal opinion, I think Archie's going to do a heck of a job. I like Archie. I think he's going to do a really good job. People have to give him time. I've said on other broadcasts, in all the years that I've been watching IU basketball for a very long time, obviously, I have never seen a team racked with as many injuries in one season. Now, that's not a total excuse, but it is a fact. And yes, we've had teams that have lost you, whether you take Scott May, or whether you take Alan Henderson, or whether you take Mike Woodson and Randy Whitman. You can go with that, but it's not an excuse when you look at what they had there.
No, I think that's a good point, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing sort of a full, healthy roster next season for IU's basketball team. On the same note of Archie Miller, do you think Branch would have any advice for Archie after Archie's first couple of seasons here?
I'm sorry, you broke up. What did you ask?
No, I was just wondering. Archie's been the head coach for a couple of years now. Do you think Branch would have any kind of advice for Archie Miller at this point?
Oh, first of all, most coaches, unless you're asking for advice, are not going to solicit or give you advice because they're going to stay out of your way and let you coach. And I think he would tell Archie to keep working the kids as hard as he is. Obviously, Branch liked to fast break, so he would obviously tell Archie to keep getting fast kids and take it up and down the court. But the number one thing that Branch would tell him would be to just stay the course. You have your plan, you execute your plan until you no longer have the ability to execute your plan. And I think that's what he would really tell him.
Nice. So one thing I was curious about is, and I know, Bill, you follow modern day college basketball. Is there? I know we're spanning across eras here, but is there any current college coach or even NBA coach that you would compare Branch McCracken to?
Truthfully, it's a different. It's so different. I would say, yeah, I think the person that I could probably compare him the most of anybody to, and I'll get into another story in a second, but probably would be Brad Stevens because of how Brad Stevens attacks the game and how successful he was with the players he had throughout the years. Now, that being said, a great story is, again, a Ray Pavey story. Ray and Herman Wells are sitting at an IU game when Knight's coaching, and Knight starts going on and on, and I mean he's just lambasting the officials and really going after him. And Wells looked to Pavey and he said, he goes, Knight has nothing on the sheriff. And Pavey goes, yeah, I know. He really doesn't have anything on the sheriff. A great story, another great story about Branch is one time he went out on the court. He was so he was so upset with an official. He jumps out on the court and he's running out there talking to him. And the official looks at Branch and he said, Branch, it's going to cost you a technical for every step it takes you to get back to the bench. And Branch froze right there. He looked over the bench. He called two of his players to come out on the court, and they carried him back to the bench. No technical was assessed.
That's great.
So that's one of my favorite stories about Branch. And another story, and when we're doing this, that I cannot let this go without giving this story, and that is that when Branch was toward the end of his career, and he was really pretty sick, and the doctor he was in the hospital. The doctor came and told Dave, his son, and Mary Jo's wife. He said, "Listen," he goes, "I just told Branch he's going to have to quit coaching or else he's going to die." And so Dave said, Mom and I didn't want to go in because coaching was his life, and that's what was his life. We didn't want to go in and see him. And he said, we go in, and Dad's just smiling and laughing and everything. And we said, "Did you not hear what the doctor said?" He goes, "Yeah, I heard perfectly what the doctor said. But understand," he goes, "now I know how I'm going to die." So, that was what basketball meant to Branch and everything. And, when you look at, I know when modern people look at the statistics for, Branch won 364 games at IU in 24 years. That's only an average of about 15 wins a year. That's true. Absolutely true. What people don't understand is for 5 of those years, 24, Indiana only played 20 games. And 8 of those years, they only played 22. And then another 8 of those years, they only played 24. See, 15 wins out of the amount of games you played was quite an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. So you'd probably have to look more at the win percentage than actual number of games won.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh, absolutely.
Gotcha. So we have a couple questions that were sent in on Twitter if you'd like to answer them.
Sure.
So Sudden from Twitter asked, what was your relationship with Fog Allen like?
With Branch?
Branch, yeah, I assume Branch's relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, I would describe it pretty much the same as with Tony Hinkle. They were competitors. They got along, really wanted to beat each other. And he, in the 53 championship game against Kansas, he got pretty upset with the Kansas pick and with Allen and with the players because Kansas had this really good big man. We had Don Schlunt, who was a really good big man, and they had a kid named Bourne, who was a really good big man. And he got his 5th foul. But then the people that were doing the game, the officiating and the official score said it was only 4 fouls. So Branch charged at on and said, "Hey, you guys, we're your guests and you're cheating us." So they had their ups and downs too.
Gotcha. Okay. For the next question, Rob asked on Twitter, who was Branch's favorite player that played for him?
I saw that question, and I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I'm going to answer it a little differently because as a coach, sometimes it's hard to pin one player as your absolute favorite player. But I will say this. Branch would always say that the Van Arsdales were his greatest recruiting achievement. And part of that was the fact that he got the Van Arsdales to come to IU, even though IU was on probation. Not that Branch had done anything, but back in those days, the NCAA, our football team had made a couple of violations, so we were put on a 4-year probation. Every sport, nowadays it just would be the sport that made the infraction, but back then, every sport in the whole university was put on probation. So for Branch to get Arsdales was a big coup for him. I would say that one of his favorite players would have to be a kid that played in the late 40s, early 50s for him, a guy named Lou Watson. He was an All-American at IU. He was from Jeffersonville, Indiana. He went on to become Branch's assistant coach for years and years and years. And then Branch made sure when he retired that Lou would become the head coach at IU. So I think, there was a special relationship there between Branch and Watson, and he always considered Watson a coach on the floor for him. So I can't really say definitively who his favorite player all time were, but those are a couple of examples of players that were close to him.
Gotcha. You broke up on the last one just a bit during the name. Did you say Lou Watson was the last name?
Lou Watson, yes.
Gotcha.
Lou Watson.
Gotcha.
From Jeffersonville, Indiana, All-American at IU, and then was the assistant coach for IU for years under McCracken, and then was the head coach at IU from 1966 until 1970.
Gotcha.
Well, Bill, we have time for about one more story. Is there a favorite that you have, or something you haven't said yet that you really wanted to get out there about Branch McCracken?
Let me give you another favorite story of mine, and this involves Bill Garrett, because Bill Garrett would be the pioneer of African American basketball players in the Big Ten. Came from Shelbyville, Indiana. At first, a group of African American leaders had come from Indianapolis, and they came to Herman Wells and they said, we would like for Bill Garrett to come here and play, but and Herman Wells said, well, great, that's wonderful. They won't have him come here. And so Herman Wells says, well, let me call Branch. So he called Branch. He goes, Branch? He goes, would you like to have Bill Garrett play for you? He goes, I'd love to have Bill Garrett play for me. If I do, all the coaches in the Big Ten, they're going to ostracize me because they don't want African-American players playing in the Big Ten. And Wells said, look, if you'll take Garrett, I'll make sure by their presidents that nobody gives you a hard time. So of course Bill Garrett comes to IU, and Branch loves having him. Well, they go to Northwestern, and because this was the same time that Jackie Robinson was breaking the color line in baseball, they tried to stay usually at the University Union buildings because that was the least amount of trouble. But this one time they were going to have to stay in a hotel in Chicago. So they go into the hotel, they walk in as a team, and the manager comes from behind the desk, and he puts his finger in Bill Garrett's chest, and he says, you can't stay here with him. Branch went ballistic. So Branch is this big guy. He lunges at the guy. The manager jumps behind the desk, hiding from Branch. Branch jumps over the desk after him. The players and assistant coaches are grabbing Branch to make sure that he doesn't get to him because they don't want him arrested, and they didn't have a coach for the game. But that's how. And then when Bill Garrett graduates, and his senior year, Shelbyville's having a Bill Garrett All-American Day, and it's a very cold winter day, and there's a big snow, and many of the roads are closed. But Bill Garrett Day is still going to take place. Well, Branch comes to 60 miles to Shelbyville. Even in the storm, he comes because he wants to be there to honor Garrett, and he ends up talking about Garrett, talking about what a gentleman and what a scholar he was and what a fantastic player he was. So, that's how he felt about Garrett. And that was a pretty momentous time in IU basketball history.
Of course, and I think that also goes into the question that I asked earlier about just what kind of person was he, and I think that's just also a great way just to wrap up Branch as a player, a coach, a person, and all of that.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for being able to come on to our podcast and give us just insight that you can't find anywhere else on the internet, or just besides your head in your book that you were able to write down. So thank you for coming. I know we definitely appreciated this. Our audience really appreciated it.
Well, thank you very much, Noah. I really appreciate being with you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I hope it was entertaining and delightful.
Oh, definitely. It definitely was. Well, that about wraps it up for our 93rd show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. We will be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. Big thanks to our audience for coming out and participating in that chat. Make sure to stay tuned through updates on Twitter. Visit our website, indianahq.com, and subscribe so you can get all of those episodes right to your phone. Send us your questions as the audience so we can get them on our next episode. Most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support is really, really how we grow this podcast so we can reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.